It's not even really cold enough to be wearing a jacket, but it's keeping the sawdust and other stuff off of me as we make room for some Christmas trees and some other fruit type varieties of things. We have some figs that need to be transplanted over here. We have some wild blueberries that we want to get transplanted, and this seemed like as good a spot as any. So there's our potato patch, and then obviously these trees are gonna go away, but starting from this tree, that will stick over to the red spot of stuff, which I think is right there, is going to be the other corner. And so we took out 2 oaks that were in here, and I'd already cut down that pine tree a couple of weeks ago. We got the oak moved out and up the hill to process for firewood. Sorry, I was looking up the hill. The skid steer stopped. To process for firewood for next year. And then we've got a couple of others. You can see some small trees in here. And then this area is going to be cleaned up. So these pines will go and this scrub stuff will go. And that's what we call lovingly the telephone road right there. So we're just going to clear that section out. That tree will probably go. And no offense to anybody that likes them, but I hate pine trees. So they're going to come down. And we're going to open all this up, but most of these we're going to push the other way with the skid steer as we're cutting them down. And you can see that we've got some from storm damage a couple of years ago. Big curved ones. Those are just a danger, and they're also really puny. One of the oaks that we cut down is very similar to that tree right there, but it has no top. We've got a dead pine there, just as an example, but one of the oaks that we cut down had no top, and a new cluster of limbs had grown around the top like this, and there was a little bird's nest or something down in there. We were going to get the grid for the Christmas trees laid out today, but we had to take those trees down that were in the way so that we didn't drop them on any of the soon-to-be planted trees, yada yada. So this area was mulched, and we saw the video from that, and what I've got here is a little plow end stump. I got stuck here. So much so that the tractor, when I shut the tractor off, it was hard engaged into gear and had to get my wife to push the tractor with the skid steer so I could disengage the transmission. Since this field had been mulched, there were lots of small stumps left and lots of root clusters, and instead of having all of that stuff sprout back to life as soon as spring hits, I thought I would run through here and tear some of it up, pull it out and let it mulch on its own off to the side. And at the same time, I was curious to see what the underlying soil would look like. This is nicely dark brown on the top. It has had lots of leaves and pine needles for several years, and now that it's got the mulch on top of it to rot, it should be fairly pretty in the near future. Since this is a small tractor, it's only 15 horse, I'm being very gentle on it. I'm not flying through the field. I've sped this up. I did it with time lapse, and I've actually sped the time lapse up to make it go a little bit quicker. But I am allowing the tractor to do the work in a very comfortable manner, not forcing it, because I was unsure what size stumps I was going to run into. The one that I ran into initially at the beginning was a long running route. I don't remember where the stump was exactly. And it just, like I said, dead stop on the tractor and the wheel started spinning. There are a couple of larger stumps in here, and we cut down a couple of trees in here, so those are very full stumps from 60, 70 foot tall trees that I'm not going to drive the plow in, over, and around. Try to avoid those as much as possible. But there are some smaller ones in there that the little tractor in this little plow was able to pull up and to get out of the field. Additionally, the root clusters that were left behind from the mulching, because there's a lot of wisteria, which is a nuisance vine, and this area was heavily inundated with it, so a lot of that's been coming up, and just a lot of normal weeds and stuff. And so those piles get pushed over to the side, and we'll let them decompose, and then we'll use them as compost later. Our neighbor stopped by for a chat and offered to help us cut down a couple of trees back by the creek that were problematic. One of them was quite large. So I got a little distracted on this particular day. So now we're going to lay out the grid for the trees. This was an exercise that was a little difficult for a couple of reasons. One is I'm very particular and wanted it to be perfect or near perfect, and I did not explain it to my wife very well what it was I was trying to do. So these big green posts, these are T-posts. We pound those into the ground. The first one was the quote-unquote anchor point. We measure out the distance for 10 trees with a particular spacing, which I'll talk about later. And then we measure from there to the next point, which is for 10 rows of trees. If you do the math on that, that's 100 trees. So we measure across the front, measure down, and then we do the diagonal to hopefully get something that's semi sort of square-like, well, rectangular in fashion. And we drive those stakes in, and then we'll go through and we'll drive some additional stakes to pull a string across for the rows. text on the screen indicates that I am making note of where I planted what. Well, I made a spreadsheet. And for anybody that knows me, they know I make spreadsheets. I did this in Google Docs. This is something that we have accessible on our phones while we have it with us. And I've got a couple of tabs and actually a couple of different spreadsheets I need to consolidate so that we know where we planted what and when. And so you can see that I have determined, I've removed people's names to preserve their identity, protect their identity, that we need about 7 per year. We've got 10 per row, and so far we're on halfway through the second row, but you can see that we planted from east to west, and then that also says closest to the drive, north. I don't know what I was trying to communicate with myself, but we went from east to west and then north to south. So east to west with the individual plants, and then the rows are going to be north to south. I'll make better notes. So the first row, we've got Leland Cypress, Green Giant, Arbor Vitae, if that's how you pronounce it. Transplanted cedar, that it's a space for a red cedar, and note that I also added the date that we planted these so we can come back and see how they progress over time. And the pattern repeats, and the pattern repeats, and then as we interject additional trees, I will add that out across the rows through rows 3, 4, 5 through 10, and each of the individual spaces, and record the dates as well. Alright, so we found these two last week when our neighbor was helping us cut up the tree, and we found them down here side by side, which is nice and convenient, close to the creek. Now I think we've got another one down by the creek. As she repositions, she didn't think she could fit. Out horsepowered. Okay, down here by the creek, have a large one. We're not going to transplant it. It's a little too tall. But there was this cedar, and then there's another cedar right there. And let's see, there is a cedar right there, and a cedar, you can see the flag right there, and then another one, where was it? Right here. We've got one tiny little cedar tree that we're going to dig up and transplant. Such a heavy load. These 3 tiny little cedar trees. I did all that with time lapse. Let me start over. Okay, so today, finally, we got trees in the dirt. I got the stakes painted yellow on the top just so they're easy to spot and we don't run over them with the tractor or anything else. Additionally, we got part of the grid laid out for the few trees that we do have. We have, starting here, Leland Cypress, Green Giant, transplanted cedar, and then we have an empty spot where the stake is, which will be for the eastern red cedar cuttings that I have at the house, which will be our seedlings. And then the pattern repeats, so it's Leland, Green, transplanted, ours, Leland, Green, and then on the next row it is transplanted, ours, Leland, Green, we stopped there because we only had 8 of the Lelands and 8 of the Green Giants. These are recommended for our area for Christmas trees. This is what some of the other farms have as well. We're hoping that the Green Giants are different from the cedars that we have here, which are different from the eastern red cedars which we have at the house that I've taken cuttings of to make seedlings. Additionally, I'm going to order some seedlings for some Virginia pine, and we're going to see how well which one does the best here. The Virginia pines look pretty cool. With these guys spread out and in the dirt, even the transplanted ones, the cedars should grow between 1 to 2 feet per year, which would be nice. We do have some additional cedars from around the property that we want to transplant here, and they're kind of cheaters. They're 3 to 4 to 5 feet tall. We're going to bring out bigger shovels for that and use Holly's backhoe digger thing, because they are just too big to dig up and to move. These are not intended for commercial resale as of today. Maybe. Depends on who you talk to. These are intended for our use, and for some family, and for some friends. And if we have any success with it, we may do some additional stuff. Now, so this is the Christmas trees. And if I turn this way, this is all the newly mulched area. And then that's our potatoes. They haven't come up yet. In this additional spot, we have just in this area here, so from that tree to the tree line, back down here to the telephone road, it's about 1/4 of an acre, give or take. Yeah, pretty close to 1/4 of an acre. We just threw potatoes in here because we had the space, and it was about that time. Something on my phone said plant potatoes now, so I did. The trees are going to be a longer running thing. We do have some additional trees that we will get out of here because they're leaning over. I mean, we got several over here that are windswept that we'll get out of the way. And then we got a bunch of nuisance spindly pines that are huge. Anyway, I'm going to get rid of those and open this up for some more sunlight. The topsoil here is really nice and dark. It's really pretty dirt. And about 1 foot down, we start getting into the clay. So fingers crossed this isn't just a huge waste of time. Yeah, it's not a waste of time. We're out here having fun. If it doesn't work, it's a lesson learned. Check a box and come back with a different idea next year. And given how there are very successful pines down here, these pines should also do well. So we do have some stakes marked for the next batch of seedlings. And I didn't explain what we did. Let me explain what we did. Based on everything I read, I didn't read anything. I watched a bunch of YouTube videos. Now I'm an expert. I didn't even stay at a Holiday Inn Express. We're going for 5-foot spacing between the trees from east to west. And then the rows from north to south is a 6-foot spacing. So the 6 feet will allow us to drive a tractor through to keep it mowed and clear of any big debris. And then the space in between the trees, the 5-foot spacing, and that's center to center from tree to tree. We can do that by hand with my brush cutter. There we go. And we've got a row of 10, and then we've got enough space here for, back there, yep, there it is. From there to here, that should be enough for 10 rows. That's 100 trees. That seems ridiculous. But part of the plan is, you know, every year that you cut down a Christmas tree, you want to have another one come back the next year. So you need to plant a couple this year, plant a couple next year, plant a couple the year after, plant a couple the year after, and just have a cycle. I figure between, well, okay, so it's us, my nephew, Garen, Corey, Alfred, my neighbor, so 4 people, 4 sets of families, 2 need trees, or that I've offered trees to, if you know, any partake. And say if a couple of other friends come out of the woodwork to want a live tree one year or the next year or whatever. The more the merrier. It just gives me an excuse to do more extreme, stupid stuff. Do it overboard. Plant more potatoes than we can eat in a year. Share them with friends. Share them with people. So this spot is planned for 100 trees. And the seedlings that I have started, we were only going to do about 30, which means there's probably closer to 50. Because I couldn't stop. And then we can do some more. If we're successful with those, then we'll do some more next year. And I may go ahead and order some of the Virginia pine seedlings to get those in the ground and let them get started. Again, to see what they do in this area. They should work just fine. They should be successful. And those guys should easily grow 1 to 2 feet per year. So we may end up with more trees than we need or want. I'll put a sign out by the road. Or here on the channel. Oh, the spacing. Oh, so if part of the explanation, okay, so these posts right here are the outer perimeter. So we got the 4 corners. Took us forever. That was early in the video. This has taken us about 3 weeks. The spacing, like I said, is 5 feet by space between rows is 6 feet. What I was doing is a shovel that I brought back from my brother's was, I think it was 4'8". So we laid that on the ground as our 5 foot spacing. And so these are not quite 5 feet apart, they're more like 4'8" apart. And so we just laid that down, drove a stake in, laid that down, drove a stake in, laid that down, drove a stake in. And that was what you saw earlier in the video. And I may overlay this with that video and hood you guys back. I think that's enough. The sun is setting. Lens flare. No, not. Oh, there it is. Lens flare. Right there. It's not that dramatic. Looks more like a little green firefly. Alright, that's good enough. Bye. That was the other important thing. It's going to rain tonight and tomorrow, so we don't have to water these today. Back to the sunset. No, really. Bye. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.
Too many hobbies, not enough time.
It's a theme song, y'all.